The snow had been falling since noon. By the time Daniel Hayes walked the length of the east corridor on the fourth floor of Northwell Medical Center, it was pressing thick against every window, a white wall between the hospital and the city beyond. The overhead fluorescence gave the hallway a particular kind of cold, not temperature, something else. The cold of surfaces meant to be cleaned, of spaces designed for passing through and not stopping in. Daniel stopped in it. He put his back against the wall between room 412 and the supply closet, tipped his head back until it rested against the painted cinder block, and closed his eyes. 43 seconds. He had learned, over the past 9 months, that 43 seconds was approximately how long he could allow himself before his face stopped cooperating, before the muscles around his eyes gave out, or his jaw tightened in the wrong direction, or the thing he was trying to hold in the center of his chest began rising toward his throat. So he used all 43 seconds. He stood there in his gray maintenance coveralls, boots wet from the service entrance slush, and he let himself feel the full weight of what Dr. Hannah Reed had said in the small consultation room 20 minutes earlier. The valve has deteriorated faster than we anticipated. We're looking at a mandatory surgical intervention, open heart. Full bypass within 60 days. The cost after insurance, and here she had paused, which told him she was a decent person, will be approximately $45,000. He had nodded. He had said thank you, which had made Dr. Reed's face do something complicated. Then he had walked down 2 flights of stairs rather than take the elevator, because he needed the extra 90 seconds. At 39 seconds, he heard it. Through the door at his back, the door to room 412, came a sound so small and clear it cut through everything. His daughter singing. Emma, 6 years old, with a heart valve that had been wrong since before she was born, singing a song she had half invented about a dragon who collected colored glass. She always changed the melody in the second verse. He didn't know why. He had never asked. He opened his eyes at 43 seconds exactly. He brought his right hand up and touched the outer corner of each eye quickly, precisely, the way a person checks a stove before leaving the house. Then he straightened his spine, rolled his shoulders once, and arranged his face. He pushed the door open. Emma looked up from her drawing she drew constantly. Pages of complicated small scenes, whole worlds populated by creatures she named and then introduced to each other, and she said, "Daddy, I made you a clue." "A clue to what?" "The puzzle." She pushed the paper toward him with the focused gravity of someone presenting evidence. "You have to find the treasure." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed. He picked up the drawing. It was a map, dense with landmarks, and in the corner she had drawn a small figure with dark hair and a wrench in his belt that he understood was supposed to be him. "Is the treasure good?" he said. "It's the best thing," Emma said seriously. "You have to find it, though." "I can't just tell you." He stayed for 40 minutes. He did 3 puzzles. He watched her draw 2 more segments of the map. He held her hand while she fell asleep after the evening medication, and then he sat for another 10 minutes in the chair beside her bed, not moving. Then he went back out into the corridor. At the far end of the hallway, 40 feet away, a woman stood near the window, overlooking the snow-covered courtyard. She had been there, Daniel would later understand, for some time. Victoria Sterling was 41 years old and had run Sterling Group, a mid-size investment firm, with a particular focus on medical technology and hospital infrastructure, for 11 years. She had come to Northwell that afternoon not as a patient or a visitor, but in her professional capacity. The firm had seeded the funding for a pediatric care renovation on this floor 2 years ago, and there was a quarterly check-in with the facility director scheduled for 4 o'clock. The meeting had ended early. The elevator had been slow. She had been standing at this window, thinking about a clause in a contract, when the man in the maintenance uniform came out of the room at the other end of the hall. She watched him, not particularly meaning to. She had seen a great many faces in rooms that were not intended for feelings. Boardrooms, court corridors, waiting areas outside ICUs. She had developed, without deciding to, a sensitivity to the particular set of a person's jaw when they are holding something in. The particular quality of stillness that is not peace, but its opposite, stillness, as containment, as the last measure of control when everything else has been given up. She recognized it in this man. She watched him check the corners of his eyes, that small, practiced motion. She watched him roll his shoulders, watched the deliberate reassembly of expression. She watched him go through the door. She did not look away from the door for a long moment after it closed. Then she looked down at the corridor itself, at his footprints, still wet on the polished floor. And she thought, he does this often. Daniel Hayes had sold his car in October. It had been a 2017 Honda Civic, with a crack in the rear bumper and seat warmers that only worked on the driver's side. And he had gotten $4,200 for it, which had covered 2.5 months of the parking fees for Emma's room, plus 3 co-payments, plus the new compression socks Dr. Reed had recommended, plus this still made him feel a particular complicated shame. 4 weeks of peanut butter. He took the M15 bus now, 42 minutes each way, depending on traffic and the snow. He owned 2 sets of work clothes and washed one each night in the sink of his studio apartment on 112th Street, hanging it over the shower rod to dry before the 5A. Mrs. Alarm. The apartment cost him $1,350 a month, which was the cheapest he had found within reasonable distance of the hospital, and which left him, after insurance premiums and Emma's ongoing prescriptions and the minimum payment on the one credit card he had not yet closed, approximately $312 per month. He ate 1 real meal a day, at the hospital cafeteria, using his employee discount. None of his co-workers knew this. Devin, who ran the overnight shift with him on Tuesdays and Thursdays, knew that Daniel was a single dad with a sick kid. Everyone knew that. But the texture of it, the bus in the snow, the sink laundry, the careful arithmetic at the grocery store, he kept that interior. He had learned early that pity changed the quality of a room. And he needed the rooms in his life to stay simple. He had been a biomedical systems engineer before Emma. He did not often let himself think about this, not because it caused him pain, or not only that, but because the thinking wasn't useful. The facts were, he had completed a master's program at Johns Hopkins at 27, had spent 4 years at a medical device company where he had been part of the team that identified a significant malfunction in a widely used cardiac monitoring system, a flaw that had gone undetected through 2 full rounds of certification, and which, left uncorrected, would have affected nearly 40,000 patients. The work had mattered. He had been good at it. Then Emma's mother had left when Emma was 8 months old, citing, without apparent irony, an unwillingness to parent a child with ongoing medical needs. He had held on for 2 more years. He had hired a nanny he could not afford, asked his mother for help she could not sustain, missed deadlines, missed flights, missed the window on a promotion that would have changed his insurance tier. Then Emma had had a crisis at 14 months that required an emergency procedure, and he had been on a runway in Denver when it happened, and he had understood in the taxi from the airport to the hospital that he was going to have to choose. He had chosen. Northwell had been hiring. The hours were flexible in the way that maintenance hours are flexible when you're willing to take the least desirable shifts. He could be in the building. He could be on the 4th floor within 4 minutes if something happened. He learned the rhythms of the pediatric ward, the way a person learns a language by living in a country, not by studying it, but by being inside it, until it became the structure of ordinary time. Emma knew him as her father, and as the man who fixed things in the building where she spent her days. She had once, with complete seriousness, told Dr. Reed that her daddy could fix anything, and Dr. Reed had said, "I know, sweetheart," in a way that had suggested she meant more than the plumbing. He was good at being invisible. It was a skill he had developed deliberately. In his former career, the engineers who lasted were the ones who could make themselves small in certain rooms and large in others, who knew which moments required visibility and which required simply getting the work done. He applied this now in a different register. He was the person you called when the MRI suite's backup generator tripped its thermal cutoff at midnight, or when the HVAC on the pediatric floor developed the particular rattling irregularity that, if left too long, would cycle the humidity out of the acceptable range for a child with respiratory sensitivities. He fixed things. He did not announce them. He had developed a reputation in the building, though he had not sought one. The nurses on the 4th floor knew him not as a maintenance technician in any generic sense, but as the person who understood why things failed. There was a difference. and they had come to appreciate it. Most technicians arrived with a checklist. Daniel arrived with a question. The question was always some version of what is this system actually doing right now that it isn't supposed to be doing, and his ability to answer it quickly had prevented at least 4 situations, in the 2 years he had been working the floor, that would otherwise have required patient transfers or clinical delays. He never mentioned this. He filed the maintenance reports and moved on. The reports were, if anything, underwritten, brief, technical, conclusory, because he had learned that detailed reports attracted attention, and attention attracted questions, and questions attracted the kind of conversation that would make his presence on the 4th floor seem like more than what he told people it was, which was maintenance. He kept a small notebook in the left chest pocket of his coveralls. In it he wrote, in precise small handwriting, every system in the building that he considered to be operating within acceptable parameters, but trending toward failure. He updated it on his phone during the bus ride in, cross-referencing against his memory of the previous day's readings. It was not a required document. No one had asked him to keep it. He kept it because the pattern of deterioration told him things the formal logs didn't. Told him when something was 2 months from a crisis versus 2 weeks, told him which repairs to prioritize and which to flag for budget review. He had tried, early on, to present this information through the official channels. Richard Cole had told him, with the particular patience of a man explaining obvious facts to a slow colleague, that he was a maintenance technician and not an engineer, and that his job description did not include predictive analysis. He kept the notebook. He just stopped sharing it. His bank balance, on the morning after Dr. Reed's news, was $407. The financial counselor's name was Marcus, and he had the practiced gentleness of a person who delivered bad news for a living. The issue, Marcus said, is that your credit history shows 2 accounts in collections, both from 2021, and your current debt-to-income ratio puts you outside the range we need for the medical financing program. He paused. I'm sorry, if the situation were different. Is there an appeal process? Daniel said. Marcus explained the appeal process. It would take approximately 30 business days to complete, which was approximately 30 business days longer than useful. Daniel thanked him. He walked back upstairs. He stood outside room 412. From inside, he could hear Emma talking. She talked to herself when she drew a low, continuous narrative, the voice she used to describe the world she was building. He stood with his hand flat against the door, not pushing it open yet. There was a particular mathematics to impossibility that he had been doing for several years now. You take the number you need, and you subtract the number you have, and you look at what remains. Usually what remains is something you have to solve for. He was good at solving for things. He had always been good at that. $45,000. He had $407. He had a studio apartment worth negative equity, a maintenance salary of $31,000 a year, 1 credit card with a $200 limit, and a daughter who was currently narrating a detailed story about a dragon named Theodore, who had opinions about architecture. He thought about the 3 contacts still on his phone from his engineering career colleagues he had not called in 2 years. He opened the screen, looked at the names, closed the screen. He was not above asking for help. He had asked for help before, but $45,000 was a number that changed the nature of an ask. It moved it out of the category of help and into the category of debt, and debt between people who used to be peers was a different kind of weight than debt between strangers. He thought about his mother. In Philadelphia. Retired teacher. Fixed income. The small house on Linwood Avenue, where he had grown up. She had helped when she could. He knew to the dollar how much she had given over the past 3 years. He could not call her with this number. He sat down on the floor of the hallway, not against the wall but actually on the floor, his back against the door, his long legs folded, his work boots squeaking softly against the linoleum. This was not something he usually did, but there was something about sitting on the floor that the body understood as permission, as a small surrender of the performance of coping, and he needed that for exactly as long as he could afford it. He thought about the biomedical conference he had attended in Baltimore 2 months before Emma's birth, where a colleague had given a paper on predictive failure analysis in cardiac implants. He had been good at that conference. Good at all of it, the papers, the conversations, the way a room of people working on hard problems felt like oxygen. He had gone back to his hotel room and worked until 3 in the morning on a methodology question that the morning session had opened up, and he had felt, that night, entirely himself. He did not often let himself think about this anymore. Not because he regretted his choices, he did not. Not once. Not ever, but because the distance between that person and this person, sitting on a hospital floor with $407 and a 60-day window, was a distance that served no purpose to measure. He put both hands flat against the door. He stayed there for 90 seconds longer than his usual 43, and the feeling that came up this time was something beyond the ordinary weight of it. It was the particular terror of the parent who has been keeping everything in motion through sheer continuous effort, and who can see, with some clarity, the moment when effort alone will not be enough, when the problem will exceed the solver. He had not allowed himself to sit with that feeling in a long time. He let himself sit with it now. Then Emma said, inside the room, "Theodore doesn't like when roofs are too pointy. He says it's impolite." Daniel made a sound that he was aware, distantly, was a laugh. Then he wiped his eyes. Then he pushed the door open and said, "Theodore's right. Pointy roofs are a menace." Emma looked up, delighted. "I knew you'd agree." She asked the head of facilities management about him the following morning. She framed it as an administrative inquiry. She was reviewing staffing structures as part of the infrastructure consultation, which was true enough. The facilities director, a man named Richard Cole, gave her the name Daniel Hayes with a particular tone she filed away. Not quite dismissive. Something more considered than that, the tone of a man who has a subordinate, who exceeds him in some dimension he cannot quite name, and has found a way to be resentful of it. That afternoon, she had her assistant pull what could be pulled from professional records. The picture that assembled itself was not what she had expected. Daniel Evan Hayes, B.S. in Mechanical Engineering, University of Michigan, M.S. in Biomedical Systems Engineering, Johns Hopkins. 4 years at Vantage Medical Systems, where public records from an FDA advisory proceeding named him as one of 2 lead engineers in the identification of a systemic flaw in the CardioTrack 4000 monitoring system. A flaw that had been missed by 2 independent certification bodies and which, following Hayes's team's analysis, resulted in a voluntary recall and a corrective protocol that was currently cited in 3 published papers on device safety methodology. 40,000 patients, approximately. The kind of work that mattered in ways that were difficult to put in a resume because they were simply too large. Then a gap of several years. No engineering positions. Northwell Medical Center. Maintenance Division. Starting in 2020, she sat with this for a while. She had seen people leave high-performance careers before burnout, principled exit, life recalibration. She had seen people step back from ambition for reasons that were their own. But there was a quality to this particular story that she kept returning to. The timing, the specific institution, the fact that he was not somewhere else, doing something adjacent. He was here, in this building, fixing the pipes in the floor above where his daughter slept. She thought about the face she had seen in the corridor. The 43 seconds of stillness. The practiced reassembly. He does this often. She had been right about that. Whatever she was looking at had been going on for some time. She was not, she told herself, constructing a narrative. She was observing. She had built a firm on the accuracy of observation, on the particular skill of seeing what was actually in front of her rather than what she expected to be there. What was in front of her now was a person whose capacities and whose circumstances were radically misaligned, and who was managing that misalignment with a degree of self-possession that she found both admirable and, in some quiet place, difficult to look at directly. She made a decision. Then she made another one, smaller, that followed from it. She would not act on it immediately. She would watch first. She wanted to be sure of what she was seeing. It happened on a Thursday, 3 days later. The situation was procedural. Daniel had been doing maintenance on the 4th floor ventilation system, a recurring issue with a damper mechanism that he had flagged in his reports twice, and which had not yet been approved for full replacement when Richard Cole appeared at the end of the hallway with a man in a suit, whom Daniel recognized as someone from hospital administration. Cole was the kind of manager who required an audience. Hayes. His voice carried down the hallway in the way voices carry in spaces designed for acoustics and not privacy. "What are you doing on this floor during regular visiting hours?" Daniel stopped. He held the wrench at his side. "Damper issue in the HVAC unit." "I have a work order." He said it neutrally. He had a long history with Richard Cole. He knew what this was. This is a patient-facing area. You know the protocol maintenance windows are before 7 and after 8. The work order was logged at 6:45 this morning. "I was reassigned during the window, due to the boiler situation on 2. Cole glanced at the man beside him. It was a specific kind of glance, the kind that performs the scene for a witness. "The issue," he said, his voice acquiring a particular texture, "is that you seem to treat this floor as personal territory. We've talked about this before." A pause. "You don't live here, Hayes. Your presence has a limit." The hallway was not empty. 2 nurses were at the station 20 feet away. A patient family had stopped near the elevator. Daniel said, "Understood." He picked up his toolkit. He walked to the supply closet, stowed what needed to be stowed, and signed out on the maintenance log on the wall. He did all of this without changing his expression or his pace. Then he walked toward the stairwell door. Cole said, to the man beside him, something Daniel did not hear the entirety of. He heard the word attitude and the phrase family situation, and a tone that framed both as explanations for a problem. Victoria Sterling, standing at the end of the corridor near the window where she had stood 3 days ago, heard all of it. She watched Daniel Hayes push through the stairwell door. The door closed. The hallway resettled into its ordinary sounds. The nurses at the station exchanged a look and returned to their screens. Victoria did not move for a long moment. She was thinking about a particular quality she had just observed, the quality of a person who absorbs something unjust without collapsing into it and without escalating into it, who simply moves through it and continues. She had seen the calculation in his face, not absence of feeling, but presence of choice. He had chosen to preserve his dignity by not performing his dignity, by not making it a thing that required Cole's acknowledgement to remain intact. She had been watching for 3 days to be sure of what she was seeing. She was sure now. The next day, at 11:47 inches the morning, the cardiac monitoring array in room 408 triggered a service alert. The specific failure was an intermittent fault in the signal processing unit, not a life-threatening equipment failure, but the kind that would require the room to be temporarily closed, while the hospital's technical services team diagnosed and resolved it. The estimated response time from the in-house biomedical team was 25 minutes minimum, given current staffing. Daniel Hayes, who was in the corridor doing the quarterly inspection of the fire suppression nozzles, heard the alert. He was not called. His job description did not include biomedical equipment. He had no standing reason to be in room 408. He walked to the door, knocked, and put his head in. The room was unoccupied. The patient had been moved for a morning procedure. A nurse named Patricia was already on the phone, coordinating the service call. "I can look at it," Daniel said. Patricia looked at him. She knew him. They had worked the same floor for 2 years. "You sure? Give me 5 minutes first. If I can't fix it in 5, I'll stay out of the way." He was done in 9. Patricia watched him work with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who has seen competence and its absence, and can tell them apart. He did not fumble. He did not hesitate. He traced the fault logic with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years thinking about exactly these systems, not the maintenance layer but the engineering layer underneath it. The logic of how the components were designed to communicate, and where that communication broke down. When he was done, he reset the panel, ran the diagnostic sequence, confirmed the output was clean, and stepped back. "It'll need a proper inspection within 30 days, he said. "The signal conditioning module has a capacitor that's aging out. It's not urgent, but it should be logged." He wrote the notation on the maintenance form, handed it to Patricia, and went back to the fire suppression nozzles. Patricia stood in the doorway of room 408 for a moment. Then she said, to no one in particular, We would fall apart without him. Victoria Sterling, who was walking down the corridor toward the elevator, slowed her pace. She had been watching. She had been waiting for the moment that would close the picture. She had not expected it to be so clean. She pulled out her phone and made a call. She called it a meeting. Technically it was. The invitation went to the relevant parties on a Friday morning. Sterling Group was conducting a review of the hospital's medical infrastructure as part of the ongoing capital investment relationship, and, as part of that review, they would be making a staffing recommendation regarding a specific technical position. Attendance was expected from the facility director, the chief of clinical operations, and the relevant department heads. Richard Cole, who was also invited, arrived 3 minutes late and sat at the far end of the conference table with the expression of a man who has been told very little and is certain he will not enjoy finding out more. Victoria stood at the front of the room with a single printed sheet and her own particular quality of stillness, not Daniel's kind, which was about containment, but the stillness of a person who has already decided and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. Sterling Group is restructuring its hospital infrastructure partnership to include an embedded technical lead role, she said. We're formalizing the position today. The person filling it will hold a 12-month contract with renewal options, carry a salary commensurate with biomedical systems engineering at the senior level, and will have full medical benefits extended to immediate family members. She placed the printed sheet on the table. The person we're recommending is Daniel Hayes, currently in the maintenance division. The room did not quite go silent because it had already been quiet. But something changed in its quality. Mr. Hayes, she continued, holds a master's degree in biomedical systems engineering and was the lead technical analyst in one of the more significant cardiac device recalls of the last decade. He has spent the past several years working in this building's maintenance department, which means this institution has been benefiting from his analytical skills at approximately 1/3 of their market value. The position we're creating is a correction, not a promotion. We're not doing him a favor. We're acknowledging what he has already been doing. She looked at Richard Cole precisely long enough for him to understand that she had seen what happened in the corridor on Thursday. Then she looked back at the room. The paperwork is ready. We'd like his start date to be Monday, Cole said, after a moment. This is irregular. Most corrections are, Victoria said. There was a small conference room adjacent to the main one. Daniel was waiting in it when one of the junior operations staff came to get him. He had been told, an hour earlier, to come to the 4th floor at 11 o'clock. No other information. He had come in his work uniform because he had been working. He sat in the conference room chair with his hands on the table and tried to construct some version of events that made sense of the summons, and failed at all of them. When Victoria Sterling walked in, he recognized her. He had seen her in the corridor more than once. Had known she was connected to the hospital in some professional capacity, had not allowed himself to think about what her presence near room 412 might mean. And he stood, and she gestured for him to sit. And she sat across from him and put the printed sheet on the table between them. He read it. He read it again. I have to ask you something, he said. Yes. Is this charity? She looked at him. No, she said. Does it read like charity to you? He read the position description again, the salary, the responsibilities. The phrase embedded biomedical systems, technical lead. He recognized the work. He recognized the skills listed. He recognized them because they were his skills, described accurately. And he had not seen them described accurately in some time. The medical benefits, he said. Full family coverage, effective from the first day of the contract. He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the paper. He did not say anything for a moment. My daughter needs open heart surgery, he said, not because she didn't know she did know. He understood that now. But because he needed to say it plainly, out loud, in a room with another person. I know, Victoria said. The cost after insurance was going to be, it will be covered. He nodded. He kept nodding for a second or two past the point where it was just acknowledgement. Then he stopped. He looked up at her. You watched me in the corridor, he said. Yes, more than once. 3 times. He absorbed this. What did you see? She was quiet for a moment, and he understood that she was choosing her words with the precision of someone who has thought about this and wants to get it right. I saw someone who wasn't giving up, she said. It was not the first time a person had said something kind to him in the past 3 years. But there was a quality to this particular sentence, the flatness of it, the refusal of easy warmth, the way it described exactly what he had been doing without dressing it, as something more that went through him in a way he was not prepared for. He looked back at the printed sheet. Monday, he said. If that works, Monday works. Emma's surgery was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of February. In the 4 weeks between the contract signing and the surgery, Daniel experienced a particular disorientation that he had not anticipated. The disorientation of a weight being lifted. He had been carrying so long that he had forgotten what level ground felt like. He found himself, on the morning bus, calculating and recalculating the new numbers, not out of fear, as he had done for years, but out of something like wonder. The math had changed. The possibilities that had not existed a week ago now existed, quietly, in the ledger. He started the new position on the Monday he had said he would. The work itself was familiar in the way that returning to a language you once spoke fluently is familiar. The grammar of it came back quickly, the precision of it, the way of thinking through a system's failure modes that he had not formally applied in years but had been applying informally every day in the maintenance corridors without acknowledgement. His new office was a converted storage room on the 3rd floor with a window, a workstation, and a whiteboard. He spent the first afternoon filling the whiteboard with everything he had been holding in the notebook in his chest pocket. It covered 3 full panels. The new salary arrived in his account on the first Friday. He sat with his phone in his hand for a long time after the notification arrived. Then he transferred a specific amount to his mother and sent her a message that said only, "Don't argue." She sent back 3 words, "I never do." Which was, to anyone who had ever met Margaret Hayes, among the least accurate statements a person could make about themselves, and which made him laugh in the empty office until his eyes were wet again for entirely different reasons. He bought Emma a book about architectural history, real buildings, real bridges, detailed photographs, because she had been drawing buildings for months, and he had been meaning to get it and had not been able to justify the $17. He brought it in on a Tuesday, and she spent 45 minutes going through it, with the focused intensity she brought to all information she considered important. And then she said, "Theodore would like this roof," pointing to a picture of the Pantheon. "It's not pointy, it's actually a dome," Daniel said. Emma considered this. Theodore respects domes, she decided. Dr. Reed came to check in on the Wednesday before the surgery. She sat across from Daniel in the small family area at the end of the corridor, and went through the procedure step by step: the bypass, the valve repair, the recovery timeline, the things that would go right, and the things they needed to watch for. Daniel listened with the full attention of someone who understood the engineering of it. He asked 3 precise questions. "Doctor." Reed answered them without the protective vagueness that she sometimes used with families who didn't want details. "You understand this better than most of the residents," she said, at the end. "I used to do this work," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "Patricia told me about the 408 equipment. And I looked you up." A pause. "I'm glad you're back." He drove Emma to the surgery floor at 6:15 on Thursday morning. Now, in a used Subaru he had bought in the 2nd week of February, a small, practical vehicle that still felt like absurd luxury every time he turned the key. Emma was wearing the sweatshirt with the small embroidered dragon on the pocket that he had ordered online, and which had arrived 2 days earlier in exactly the right size. She was calm in the particular way she was always calm, not because she wasn't scared, but because her father was there and she had learned, through 6 years of hospitals and procedures, and the ordinary terrible events of a child with a complicated heart, that her father's presence meant the thing could be survived. She had made him promise she could have pancakes the morning after. Not hospital pancakes, real pancakes. From the diner on the corner near their apartment, the ones with the blueberries on top. He had promised. She had made him specify the blueberries, because she did not trust vague pancake promises, At the door to the pre-op suite, she said, "Will you be here when I wake up?" "I'll be here," he said. "Promise?" "Absolute promise," he said. "Front row seat." She went through the door. Daniel sat down in the chair against the wall of the waiting room and put his face in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Then he raised his head and looked at the ceiling and breathed. He thought about the bridge in one of Emma's drawings, the one with the wide arch she had designed for Theodore, who required sufficient clearance. He thought about the capacitor he had noted in room 408, how it had been aging out quietly inside a functioning system for months, accumulating stress, doing its job until it stopped being able to. He thought about the way certain failures announced themselves early to someone who knew how to read them, and how the same systems, properly attended to, could continue far past the point where they would otherwise have given out. He thought about what Dr. Reed had told him, in an unguarded moment, 2 days before the surgery, when he had asked her directly what she thought the outcome would be. She had looked at him the way clinicians look at people who can handle actual information, and said, "I think her underlying anatomy is better than the imaging suggested. I think we're going to find, when we're in there, that she has more to work with than we expected." He had held that sentence carefully since then. Not with false certainty. He knew how surgery worked, knew that the expected and the actual diverged, but as something real and solid to put his hands on in the dark. He thought about a woman standing at the end of a corridor in the snow. He sat for 4 hours and 11 minutes. He drank 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall and ate a granola bar from his jacket pocket and walked to the window twice and returned to his chair. At hour 2, Patricia came through on her way to another floor and stopped and touched his shoulder, just briefly, and kept walking. At hour 3, another father, a man about his age, sitting in the corner with a phone he wasn't looking at, caught his eye and gave him a single slow nod, the acknowledgement of shared vigil, and Daniel nodded back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The surgeon, a man named Dr. Ellis, came out at 10:27 and said, "Everything went exactly as we needed it to." Daniel closed his eyes. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, and he cried quietly, without particular drama, the way you cry when the thing that has been held in suspension for a very long time is finally, actually resolved. A nurse came by and wordlessly placed a box of tissues on the chair beside him and moved on, which he appreciated. He did not want to be witnessed in this particular moment. He just needed the moment to exist. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then he wiped his face, straightened his spine, and went to find the front row seat he had promised. 4 months later, in June, the pediatric ward undertook a minor renovation. One of the projects Sterling Group had funded, a reconfiguration of the family waiting area to include better natural light and a small play corner for siblings. Daniel had been consulted on the technical specifications. He had spent 2 afternoons with the contractors going over the HVAC implications of the new partition wall. Emma was, in June, at home. In school for the first time, a real school, a class of 15 children, in a public school 6 blocks from their apartment. A teacher named Miss Forrest, who had apparently, within the first 3 days, identified Emma as a person with strong geographical opinions, and had responded by putting her in charge of the classroom map wall, which Emma had begun reorganizing with a seriousness that suggested she regarded the existing arrangement as a serious professional failing. She was not entirely well, not in the way healthy children are well without thinking about it. There were still appointments, still medications, still the particular calendar that parents of children with cardiac histories keep the dates of follow-ups, the thresholds for symptoms, the standing instruction to call immediately if she seems off. But she was well enough, which was a category Daniel had learned to treat with the same care a person treats a structural repair that has been confirmed sound. You don't stop paying attention, but you stop bracing for collapse. On a Thursday afternoon, after the contractors had left for the day, he walked the length of the east corridor one more time. The snow was gone, obviously. The windows that had been gray with winter were now pale with summer's late light. The city visible beyond them in that particular New York way, too much of it. All at once, the skyline and the street, and the water tower, and the bridge in the middle distance. The overhead fluorescents had been replaced in the renovation. The new lights were warmer. The corridor looked like itself, but different in the way that spaces look different when the thing that made them heavy has been lifted. He stood at the spot where he used to stand. He stood there not because he needed to, but because it seemed like the right way to acknowledge what had happened. To stand in the place where it had been hard, and feel the difference between then and now. He was not a sentimental person by nature, but he had learned, in the past several years, that the body keeps its own accounting, that certain places hold certain histories in them, and that it is worth returning to them when the history has changed. He heard footsteps. Victoria Sterling came from the direction of the stairwell, carrying a folder, wearing the particular expression she wore when she was moving between meetings, focused, in motion. Already partly elsewhere. She almost walked past. Then she stopped. She looked at him. He said, "Checking on the renovation. The partition is in the wrong place," she said. 2 feet south would give the children's corner better natural light. "I flagged it this morning." "I know. I flagged it 3 weeks ago. They're correcting it Friday." A brief pause. She looked at the new lights. Then back at him. "Emma," she said. Follow-up was Monday. "Dr. Reed says the valve looks better than it had any right to." He stopped. Then he said, "Because she had earned it. She made a map for you. An actual drawn map, with a treasure at the end. I've been trying to find the right moment to give it to you, but she keeps adding to it." Something moved in Victoria's face. Not a smile exactly. Something more interior than that. The expression of a person receiving news they did not know they had been waiting for. "Tell her the map is fine as is," she said. "She won't believe that. She has standards. Then tell her I'll wait." "You should know," Daniel said, "that she's been adding a section about the donor of the treasure's location. There's a woman on the map now. She has very good posture." Victoria looked at him. "Does she have a name?" "Not yet. Emma says she hasn't decided the right one." He paused. "She's been thinking about it for 2 weeks. Tell her she can take as long as she needs." He nodded. She nodded. She moved as though to continue down the corridor. And then she paused, and turned back, and he understood she had been composing something, had perhaps been composing it for some time. "In the corridor," she said. "In January. I wasn't sure what I was looking at first. I've seen a lot of people in difficult circumstances, most of them not their fault, not a criticism, most of them show it in a way that asks for something, recognition or help, or at minimum acknowledgement." She paused. "You weren't doing any of that. You were just staying vertical, staying in the thing." She looked at him with the directness she brought to all things. "That's what I saw. That's what made me want to know more." He was quiet for a moment. The corridor was warm. From room 412, which was now occupied by a different child, a 7-year-old named Marcus, who was obsessed with trains, and whose father visited every evening, came the sound of a television program, low and comfortable. "I wasn't doing anything unusual," he said. "I was just doing what needed doing." "I know," Victoria said. "That's exactly what I mean." She looked at him for a moment longer. The light was the kind that only exists in early summer evenings, almost gold. Not quite. And it caught the corridor differently than the winter fluorescence had. He looked different in it. Less enclosed. More like a person occupying their actual size. She looked down the corridor, the warm light, the new windows. The partition wall that was going to be moved 2 feet south, and she seemed to make a quiet accounting of something. The way she looked at things, he had come to understand, was the same way she listened, completely, without the performance of listening, just the thing itself. "Emma's map," she said. "Tell her she can take as long as she needs, but I want the complete version when it's done." "She'll be glad to hear that," Daniel said. "Theodore has opinions about the treasure's location. There have been revisions. Tell Theodore his input is welcome," Victoria said. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button. While she waited, she opened the folder she had been carrying and looked at something in it, not avoiding the conversation, just returning to the ordinary world at the pace it required. The elevator came. She stepped in. She did not say goodbye because the kind of people who end conversations like this one don't say goodbye. They simply allow the conversation to continue in the space after the words. He stayed at the window for a moment after the elevator closed. Outside, June was doing what June does, warm and crowded and relentless, the city pressing itself against the glass. He looked at it and felt the particular sensation of having arrived somewhere. Not at a destination exactly, but at the beginning of a different kind of distance, the kind where you can see further than you could before, where the problems that remain are problems you can name and work toward, rather than walls. He went to get Emma from her afternoon therapy session. She had added 3 new landmarks to the map since Tuesday. She showed him each one with the gravity of a cartographer presenting findings. "This one," she said, pointing to a drawing of a large star near the bottom of the page, "is the most important part." "What is it?" "You'll find out," Emma said, "when you get there." He folded the map carefully and put it in his pocket. He would add it to the file, the growing file of things that had seemed impossible and were not, of problems that had exceeded the solver until they didn't, of corridors that had once been cold and were now, in their way, habitable, of things that had been held in and of the people who, eventually, learned what to do with them, of a woman at the end of a hallway who had looked at him and not looked away, who had seen in the 43 seconds of a stranger's stillness something worth walking toward. Outside the window, the city kept going. Emma gathered her drawings. The corridor held its warm light, and somewhere in the building's infrastructure, in the walls and ducts and signal lines that Daniel now knew the way a person knows a language they grew up inside of, everything was for the moment in the particular way that matters working.